the media and the freedom of the press and so on is so important. We've got to continue looking at it a bit more. Various other aspects. And Sensei and Arnold Toynbee move on to where some sort of restriction rather than total freedom could be justified. And they point out that there are three main areas where restrictions are imposed at the present time. One is on matters of morality. Another is in terms of state secrets, so-called. And the third is in the area of individual privacy, the right of a human being to have their lives, their personal lives, not interfered with. So if you take public morality first, we've already talked about that a bit, but the essential point from Sensei's Buddhist view is the right of an adult to make their own decisions, though there may have to be some protection in terms of morals to the very young. So if you, in each of these cases, Sensei's view is, rather than restricting, make it free and let the individuals make their own decisions. So again, we can quote the example of alcohol. In America, as you may know, in the 1920s, they banned alcohol. There was total prohibition. And what resulted, of course, was that every adult American who wanted to drink went to extraordinary pains in order to be able to do so. And this played into the hands of the gangsters and the mafia and all the rest of it, and illicit alcohol plants appeared all over America. What's more, it was very bad for the health because often it was the most awful form of rough alcohol, wood alcohol as they call it. Many people became sick through it. But whatever happens, people went on drinking, even though there was prohibition. And it led to a great deal of violence and gang warfare as a result. So this certainly is a good example of how, if you try to restrict things, actually make the situation worse. And I mentioned earlier pornography as well, which Sensei put in the same category. So in the Ikeda-Wilson dialogue, Sensei said this: although, as you know, I am a vigorous advocate of freedom of expression, I think the media ought to emphasize more clearly the mutual understanding, trust, and affection that make sex worthwhile. This is, they were talking about sex generally. And that help partners to overcome life. So it would have to be accompanied by some sort of special tribunals, wouldn't it? Who would have to make judgment. Mm. 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 Yeah. Yes. Thank you very much, Becca. Anyway, it's an interesting point for people in the media to think about, that it would give the people, some sort of system like that would give people who worry about this manner some reassurance, wouldn't it? Anyway, it's an interesting thought over an important matter. We have to decide on, in the future, we have to decide on ways to protect and maintain the absolute fairness of the reporting of people in the media. Absolute integrity. Because in that way, we are preserving the dignity of life, aren't we? The dignity of each individual. It is not preserving the dignity to allow people who are distorting their reporting to affect the minds of people. So in that sense, also, Wilson says, haven't religions also failed to give any guidelines to hold people on the right course up to the present? And he points out that the Ten Commandments, for example, really don't work, because people look at the Ten Commandments and they really know in their hearts they can't live up to them. And therefore, they get used to ignoring them and turning a blind eye to them, although they may feel a bit guilty that they're failing. So I think it's true, religions have failed up to the present. So in the terms of the Gohonzon and Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, of course, it should be possible then for people to follow a straight course. But even there, sometimes people might go over the top because maybe they're not practicing as strongly as they should, whatever. So how can we find, this is a question mark for you more than me, how can we find and gradually initiate some sort of control over the press? Yes, Karen. Mm-hmm. 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 Mm, There's probably a lot in that too. Yes, it's interesting. Thanks, Karen. Anyway, it's a point that you can mull over, and maybe through your Ichinen, one of these days you can, through the wisdom of the Gohonzon, find the right way to approach this particular problem. The second area where some restriction seems to be necessary is state secrets. But Sensei hotly points out that actually the fact there are state secrets immediately spells danger. There should be, strictly speaking, nothing which the public should not know. But the fact is that there are things. Maybe some sinister design on someone or something, and the government don't want that to come into the limelight. So they impose it, state secrecy on it. But as Sensei says, the state should be a public utility, and everything it does should be known. But he then, of course, goes on to qualify by saying that so long as war exists, there is always an excuse which can be justified in debate or argument for state secrets. That you will never abolish state secrets until war is finally abolished, because people will always find an excuse for it. This is understandable, isn't it? So, although state secrets are wrong, and there shouldn't be such a thing in a democracy, so long as the democracy is engaged or is threatening or is ready to be involved in war, they'll always be there. And that loophole of withholding things from the public will continue to exist. I think that's correct. So when states are concerned with war, inevitably they can prove it necessary to keep certain things secret. Otherwise, it would prejudice the nation's freedom and ability to fight in that war. So first we have to abolish war. Then we can abolish state secrets. Really, that's what it amounts to, realistically. And finally, of course, there's the privacy of the individual. And that is the one restriction which the two authors say must be upheld. The right of people to preserve the privacy of their personal lives. This is true, isn't it? And we see press often invading privacy in a way which is really horrendous. So I suppose the royal family are the biggest example, but there are also examples of people who in one way or another in public life and something happens that is sensational, like Cecil Parkinson and the woman he made pregnant, and, really appalling the way that press behaved. Who was it who told me? It was a member who was sent on an assignment at that time of the Cecil Parkinson affair. And I think it was the family his family, and they moved to a cottage in some place in a village, and the whole village was absolutely swarmed by armies of reporters of the media, not only the British press, radio, but also foreign press, and the cars were everywhere parked, people day and night waiting for someone to come in or out of this little house. I think it was the Parkinson affair. And this person, no, I know, it was someone who interviewed me from one of the radio companies. And she's a really nice girl. And I said, do you enjoy your work? And she said, well, sometimes. But some assignments, it's terrible. And she cited this case where she sat in her car waiting to see a curtain move or a door begin to open in this house, see, because she had to report. That was the assignment she'd been given by her editor. And she said, while she was sitting there, one of the people who lived in the village walked past her car. And as, I don't know if it was a man or a woman, but as he or she walked past her car, this person looked with absolute contempt and said, "Boss." And she said it went right into her heart. She felt so awful of what she was doing. So there is probably a girl who has really good intentions, really sincerely nice person, but in the grip of the editor and the sensation which the editor wants for his newspaper, she's compelled to act in that way. But this is wrong, isn't it? Privacy of the individual should be preserved. Do you agree? Great. Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. Yes, it's terrible. It really is. Horrible. Yes. So, I mean, it is, when there is no news, in other words, they will trump up news through distorting facts in some particular matter.
And they went right down, and they still press the button.
No, I agree with you. Disgusting. Yes. Awful.
So it's about 13 days.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
One way to do that, a lot goes on to make it understand the story. Start about interest. It needs to sound a little bit hard.
Sorry, I missed that. What? Yeah, on the front page. Good. I missed that. That's great. Good. Well, there you are. People are aware of it. I guess they always have been, but it seems to be very difficult to achieve anything concrete. So this is something you all have to challenge in the future. And I hope you'll shakabuku lots more people who are journalists or who are thinking of going into journalism. So the wisdom of the Gonson can really be brought to bear on these problems. And no doubt you'll achieve a change. And it is a very important area. Okay. So, having dealt with that, let's move on to something else. All right. So the next point that came up was the abolition of the death penalty. I'm not going to dwell on it too long because, as you know, we've already abolished the death penalty in this country. But even so, still almost every year without fail, there is someone lobbying in the Parliament to reinstate the death penalty. So it's by no means a dead thing. If something happened and people got emotional, it would be very possible, I think, for the death penalty to come back, even if it's only in some restricted way. In Japan, the death penalty has not been abolished. And lots of people say, how can it be in a Buddhist country? The death penalty is still there. But of course, as we know, there's Buddhism and Buddhism. And in the case of Nichiren Shoshu Soka Gakkai, of course, they they will have it in their minds always that they have to start at some point a movement to abolish the death penalty. But when Sensei was once asked this question, he said he believed in Japan and the way the Japanese people think. It'll have to be a case of first things first. First, to get underway, which is already underway, a movement to abolish nuclear weapons, and then a movement to abolish conventional war. He believes Japanese people will only start considering abolishing the death penalty when the fact of the skillful cause, in terms of cause and effect that you're making through waging war, becomes clear to them. Then they'll start thinking about abolishing the death penalty. It's interesting, isn't it? So I think when Sensei said the other day, we're 100 years ahead of Japan in the West in our thinking about matters of war and peace. And peace movement here is that more universal and upfront in people's minds compared to Japan. That's the nature of the Japanese people, I think. So we have to educate. They have to educate the people in Japan that any form of death penalty is a bad cause made by those who support it and condone it, as well as those who actually inflict it. So I think probably this right of a human being to make judgment and sentence a person to death, of course, when you think about it, it does arise out of the same attitude, the cheapness of life, which is viewed from people who make war. It's the same thing, isn't it? But much more important in both Toynbee's and President Ikeda's views is the matter of control of lethal weapons. This also, interestingly enough, is a subject that's very much at the forefront of the news now in this country because of the Hungerford killings. That naturally caused a great deal of alarm, and without doubt, during this coming year, I think we'll see a much more thorough investigation into the whole system of controlling weapons in this country. I sincerely hope, but of course, you never know. It may die. But certainly, yes.
To get people to actually pick up their weapons and knives and strikes. I've been about as well, her and out with the cabins to it. They can't send everything. There else, the chef's years in the
Now, that's wonderful. But on the other hand, there'll have to be legislation in the end, won't there? Some way this has got to be controlled. And I mean, the classic example, of course, is America, isn't it? United States, where there's such loose control over weapons and with really frightening results. But also we've seen in this country this tendency growing in recent years. And it's brought to the forefront, of course, by the police arming themselves more and more. This was unheard of when I was young. The police never have armed themselves. And there was a sort of pact between the criminal underworld and the police that they wouldn't arm themselves. It was an understood thing between the two sides, as it were. But unfortunately, because of the liberality from the point of view of obtaining arms, this was gradually changed, which is a tragedy. And I don't suppose one can go backwards to that old situation. But there were, of course, always weapons in a police station. And there were certain men who could use them in the event of a riot or something really serious, like the Sydney Street Siege. Anyone know about the Sydney Street Siege? Ever heard of it? Yes, Karen has. Sydney Street Siege. That was long before I was born. But it was a couple of people, I think they were Irish actually, who were on the run, and they boarded themselves into a house in Sydney Street in the East End. and challenged the whole world with a couple of rifles. And it was a famous siege because I think it was Winston Churchill was Home Minister at that time, and he went to direct operations. So anyway, it's a serious problem, and something that you'll all have to put your minds to in due course, and the sooner the better. Yes, Rebecca. Sorry? Oh, yes, that's right. I'd forgotten about it. And I shouldn't. What? No, that's right. I had, fun enough, when I came in today, there was a letter from the BBC. I thought they said Monday. I said, really? Okay. Anyway, when I go back to the office, I'll read the letter properly, and we can announce it anyway to the chapter chiefs tomorrow. Okay, yes, it was some sort of interview about whether I condone the carrying of arms or not, wasn't it? Okay, I enjoyed the interview. It's fun. Right. So we can probably move on, I think, from there, passing by the fact that the two authors say that prisons should be educational establishments, which I think is a very interesting way to put it. Of course, they point out that education would be enforced because it would be within the closed walls of the prison. But the prison, they say, should be looked upon as an educational establishment, more than a fortress in which people are confined. And I do think that's correct, don't you? Definitely. As long as we don't make them too attractive. So we move on from there to suicide and euthanasia. This is an interesting subject, and it actually personally affected Dr. Toynbee. It was the one point where Toynbee and Ikeda could not agree. And I'm sure this was a lot to do with the fact that Dr. Toynbee's son his eldest son, had committed suicide in 1939. And I think that perhaps somehow Dr. Toynbee, to avoid, in a way, having to face that tragedy, sort of rather blindly, in a way, felt that suicide should be the right of an individual. And he backed this up because he was a classical scholar, apart from being a great historian, and he was always very moved by Greek and Roman history. And of course, in Greek and Roman history, it was an honorable thing to do, to commit suicide in certain circumstances. If a general failed to win a battle, then to make his apology to the public, he killed himself. And as a matter of fact, in more recent times, that also has been evident in certain countries. In Japan, this was also a popular way of gaining honor from defeat, if you like, by committing in Japan ritual harakiri. Harakiri, have I got it right? Harakiri. So if any of you have been to Kabuki, you'll see ritual harakiri being performed on the stage. So many historical plays where this is one of the great dramatic moments in Kabuki. Anyone seen it? Well, it's pretty horrifying. I mean, basically, without going into the gory details too deeply, they opened their kimono here, and they take a sword and they put the sword against their stomach, and then they push it in. And then they make a speech with the sword in their stomach. They sort of make their last will and testament and their apologies for whatever it is that they're committing harakiri. And then, having finished the speech, which must be pretty agonizing, and by then their voices are getting a bit sort of gobbly, they then take the sword in their hands firmly again, and they go and cut themselves in half, basically, inside. Disgusting, isn't it? And then they have a sort of, it's not ended yet. Then they have a best man, you could call it, at this ceremony. And he then comes up with his sword and chops off the fellow's head. So it's a funny sort of game. But it's very dramatic when you see it in Kabuki. They don't show the chopping off the head part. That would be too difficult in a theatre to convey. But anyway, that's what Japan did. And not only in Japan, but in Europe too. The German sort of nobility also had a system of honorable suicide. So that if, for example, a particular general had failed, or an admiral or whatever, mostly confined, I think, to the armed forces, but also in cases amongst politicians, they would go into their room and find a revolver placed on their table or on their desk. And this was an indication that the best thing they could do in whatever the circumstances were was to kill themselves. So this was another way, even in Europe, that such things were popular. We also were a great country at one time for dueling. And dueling in its proper form was supposed to end with one or other of the two people killing themselves or being killed. So in a way, that was a sort of enforced suicide, wasn't it? Until it was made illegal. So these are ancient traditions, many of them, but they've carried through to quite modern times. So, of course, Sensei is saying that from the Buddhist point of view, to take your life is not only the worst cause you can possibly think of making, but also it's pointless. Because it means that you're taking your life because of some misery or happening which is part of your karma, and you've not changed that karma. Therefore, inevitably, you'll have to face it again in your next life. So when the great author, Mishima, committed ritual suicide about, I think, 20 years ago now, or 15 years ago in Japan, he went through the whole process, complete with having the media there and everything. And he did the whole thing as I described. But Sensei, after he'd heard the news that Mishima had done this, he said, this man will probably be born in lifetime after lifetime, doing the same thing. He said, just like a weed growing and having its head chopped off, so he'll grow and have his head chopped off time and time again, unless he practices to the gods. Interesting, isn't it? In other words, in terms of eternal life, you could spend lifetimes committing suicide because you're never changing that particular karma which brought you to that point. So probably amongst you, there are people, some of you have thought in the past, at dire moments in your lives that you wanted to commit suicide. You're shaking your head, but that's jolly good. And many people do, and including myself, long, long ago. So we realize now, through practicing this Buddhism, what an utter, stupid, pointless thing it is to do. Yes.
In the same time, they've already done that again.
Most likely. Most likely. That's right. Absolutely. Yes. Yes, of course. Of course you can. Your chanting of Daimoku for someone who's committed suicide will elevate that life state whilst it's dead, in the state of latency, in other words. Therefore, there is far greater chance that that person will find the Gohonzon in their new lives, and then they'll have to change their karma through practicing to the Gohonzon. Okay? Yes. Mm. Mm. I see. Ah, right. How great. No, it's, yes, right. I understand. Good. So you feel very free of that worry now? You should do. You should do. It was a great thing you did. So really, this is an important matter because suicide, the number of suicides is growing, not declining. And this, I'm sure, is to do with the state of the world and the pressures and anxieties and worries that it can bring onto people. So really, this viewpoint is very, very important one, isn't it, in talking to one's friends and so on, and explaining the absolute uselessness of suicide. And also, of course, of euthanasia. This is equally cutting off a life before its natural lifespan is completed. Euthanasia, in other words, being a person who decides that if they should become incapacitated in some way, that they should be quietly given a pill or an injection and snuffed out. Dr. Toynbee wanted that. That's the point. That's why also he hotly contested what Sensei was saying. So Sensei really tried hard to shakabuku him over this point. But Toynbee, I learned actually from Polly Toynbee when I went to Japan with her on what was my most difficult assignment, I should think, of my lifetime. Polly Toynbee said that her grandfather was always frightened of poverty. He was frightened of becoming incapacitated so that he couldn't write anymore, and therefore, in some way, he and his old wife would starve. And or perhaps it was also the shame of just living on national welfare. But whatever happens, he was frightened of this. So he said he'd rather be snuffed out. And she thought that was the reason why he gave that answer. But whatever happens, he disagreed with it. But interestingly enough, actually, he was paralyzed by a stroke for the last year of his life. Did I tell you that story? So as you know, he actually was incapacitated. And no one gave him that pill or injection. But you remember his secretary reported to me when I heard that he died, what an amazing year it had been. And how, his eyes were always shining, and they knew he was really thinking all the time, and perhaps reaching conclusions, amongst other things, about euthanasia. But his life was really vibrant, though he couldn't express it in any way, and certainly not hellish or miserable. So there we are. And of course, the effect of that on the secretary is a perfect illustration. She really gained inspiration about the value of life from the behavior of Dr. Toynbee. And also other people also, I'm sure, in the family and so on. It changed maybe their views too. So even there you can see that to live up to the last moment of your life is in fact very, very important indeed, because you still have a mission to fulfill. That's the point. So my old mum also lived to 94. She was a bit gaga in the last 3 years, and she didn't know where she was. She thought she was back, as a small child often. But nevertheless, she had a profound effect on everyone around her. So when she was in a good mood and not being naughty, the nurses used to have long talks with her. And they'd say to me, I had a wonderful talk with your mother this afternoon. She's an amazing old lady, they would say. She's, in a way, taught me things. So she was continuing to fulfill her mission. Also, she was continuing to fulfill it from my point of view. It was part of my human revolution to have to overcome my irritation and get in the car and go down and see her, at regular intervals when I could have been doing something else. All those sort of things. So really one's mission and purpose in life continues up to the very last breath. That I'm sure of. Yes, Carol? Mm, 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 mm. Yes. Well, I agree. Well, that is a different matter. And this is a very difficult point because really it needs a board of judges, all with different interests, doctor, member of the family, and so on, to make that judgment of when a person's life has virtually ceased and they're only being kept alive by a machine. Not in a coma. Anyone can recover from a coma. Yeah. But in the case of a life which is just being kept alive purely and simply through a machine. So if you read afterwards the handout you've been given, have you been given it? Yes, you'll find there's something about that in there. Those are various extracts from the Cada-Wilson dialogue about euthanasia, about suicide, and about artificial insemination and surrogate motherhood, which is really interesting to read. So we've already gone over time, and we'll have to close. So I meant to talk to you a little bit about abortion. Well, anyone who's rushing for a train or anything, please feel free to get up. But it's just because this is also an important point regarding to life and death. So it's in fact in the Ketatoi dialogue that Sensei says that, of course, we are all living in an imperfect world. In a perfect world, there would be no cases where a child would be about to be born into circumstances where an abortion would be justified. And the other point, of course, fundamental to the whole problem is that Buddhism is totally against taking life, and killing the fetus in a mother's womb is taking life. There's no doubt whatsoever about that. But on the other hand, one has to consider, Sensei points out, the imperfect circumstances into which that baby will be born. And there are 1,000 different types of cases that you can come across. So again, Sensei would take it back to the other aspect, which is that it must be the right of the parent, or parents preferably, plural, to make the decision of whether the baby should be born or not. And if you take that right away from the human being, then you are interfering with the dignity of life. So yes, taking life through an abortion is wrong. But if a parent chooses to do so, then that is up to them. And they must, of course, bear the responsibility for what they're doing for the rest of their lives. But there again, the responsibility is not a passive or guilt-ridden thing in terms of Buddhism. Because if that life, that baby, they decide the best thing is to abort, and they're prepared to take on the responsibility, of course that means to the person practicing Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism that they will always chant for the happiness of that baby, and that it can be reborn in more fortunate circumstances in its next life. So in that way, you take better to finish. You take that responsibility, okay? So there are many aspects to consider here. But in Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, you are given that right. And furthermore, you are given practice which will enable you to summon up your wisdom if you approach it in a most serious way and devotedly chant lots of daimoku. You will reach a conclusion based on your Buddha state, which is right for your particular case. So there is no general rule on this. You can't make a general rule. And for that reason, Sensei says one should never abolish or make it illegal for women to have abortion, because it takes away the right of decision, of choice, from the parent. That is against preserving the dignity of life. You follow? So always there is another aspect which, when it comes to the point of chanting Daimoku, will inevitably come into the minds of the parents concerned. And that is not only the circumstances into which the child is going to be born in this life, but also, of course, what its karma is. What is the nature of this child's karma to be born into such a situation where the parents are actually, or the parent is actually deciding on whether to destroy it or not. This is karma, isn't it? And the other aspect is, what is the mission of that baby? Is its mission just to bring about some incredible change in the karma of the parents through this great and somewhat awesome decision that they have to make? Is that the purpose? Through chanting Daimoku, you'll feel what is right, what is the right decision to make. Another aspect is, what is the mission of this baby in its next life? And perhaps that's illustrated most in the case not of abortion, but of a stillborn child. In a way, it's a similar thing. Child is alive in the womb, but when it's actually born, it's dead. Why? What is the function of that child? What is its karma? What is the effect on the parent? So my own experience of giving guidance over these matters is that never have I ever remembered a child being stillborn without it having some extraordinarily valuable effect on the lives of the parents. And it's to say, it brought the parents to challenge some aspect of their karma, which through challenging it enabled them to find happiness. The same also actually can apply to an abortion. The experience of the abortion in itself brings about a great change, beneficial change in the parents. So there are so many factors in terms not only just of this life, but of eternal life that have to be considered. And therefore, the only way to make that decision in the end is through chanting lots of Daimoku and making sure that the decision is based not on emotion, but on the true, deep wisdom of the Buddha state. So it's a big, big responsibility. But on the other hand, if a woman decides to abort, and if they decide that they'll take the responsibility for ensuring to the best of their ability that the child is born in more favorable circumstances in the next lifetime, I think such women really do feel the incredible responsibility, but at the same time, the incredible gratitude to this Buddhism that they're able to approach the thing in this manner, rather than giving birth to a child in maybe circumstances which would have made it extraordinarily difficult for a child to be happy. So, of course, there are, as I say, 1,000 different sets of circumstances, maybe 10,000, 20,000. You can't generalize, but that is the general view of Buddhism. Okay. Now, questions quick. Yeah. It's a good question. The purpose of the fifth prayer is to reconnect twice a day or reactivate twice a day your itching towards that person. Because, as you've heard, I'm sure, people say before, wherever your itching lies is affected strongly by your daimoku, whether you're consciously thinking of the person or not. See? So that connection is reviving that itching every day. Therefore, as you do it twice a day, then definitely every daimoku you chant during that day will affect that line. But of course, it is a good thing if you find your itching slipping. It is a good thing to make yourself consciously chant about someone if it's fading away. You understand? But generally speaking, that revival of the Ichinen. So the purpose of the fifth prayer is to concentrate your whole life on that life that is deceased. And really, as where you're establishing the connection again, aren't you? Between your life and that life, or you're opening up that connection again, so that your daimoku will naturally flow to it. Okay. It's Karen. It's true. They're far deeper and more important principles. That's correct. Yes, indeed. Sorry, say again. Uh-huh. But it doesn't matter. That's great. You know, whether they're reborn or not, your daimoku will reach. Well, I don't. Well, I don't. Yes, but in your image, surely, is that really true? You're not visualizing a corpse, are you? You're visualizing a life, right? Yes, in your mind, you may think, well, perhaps they're dead, or you may think perhaps they're reborn, but it doesn't matter because your life connection is from the entity, isn't it? The entity of your life. Nam-myoho Renge Kyo is the entity of the other life. Hmm? So, what Sensei explained or pointed out was the importance of being concerned about those who are deceased is if you set up an eternal chain of daimoku. So you're chanting someone who's deceased now, and because of that close karmic connection, when that person finds the dance, they'll be chanting, though they don't know it, they don't know you, but their daimoku will connect with you because of the close karmic life link between you. Every daimoku they chant will affect your life. Mm, mm. Yes, it goes on and on and on forever once you started it. It's an incredible idea, isn't it? So always there is someone chanting for you, lifetime after lifetime, and you're always chanting for someone else. Any other questions? We've got to stop in a minute. Yes, one more. Couldn't hear. I'm still pretty here. Now, the important thing is, it's better